You read Atomic Habits, so why are you still the same? In this video, we're going to explore Atomic Habits by James Clear, one of the most influential books ever written about behavior change. Not by summarizing its ideas, and not by repeating what everyone already knows, but by examining why this book changes some people's lives and leaves others exactly where they started. And at the end of this video, I'm going to reveal the deeper psychological reason why understanding atomic habits is never enough to transform your behavior, a reason the book hints at but never confronts directly. You read Atomic Habits. You know exactly what it says. Small changes, better systems, identity first. And yet, your life didn't change. That's the contradiction no one wants to face. You understand how habits work, but you don't live like someone who does. This isn't a motivation problem, and it's not a discipline problem. There is a psychological rule inside Atomic Habits that quietly blocks change for most people, a rule about boredom, identity resistance, and responsibility that decides whether habits reshape your life or die silently after a few weeks. Today, you're going to see that rule, and once you do, you'll understand why reading the book was never enough. Behavior beats knowledge. Atomic Habits, written by James Clear, is built around a simple but powerful idea. Small behaviors, repeated consistently, shape long-term outcomes. The book focuses on systems over goals, identity over outcomes, and the compounding effect of tiny actions. Its appeal is obvious. It feels practical, logical, and achievable. You don't need motivation. You don't need willpower. You just need better systems. And that's where the psychological trap begins. Because while the book explains how habits work, it quietly assumes something about the reader, that once you understand the system, you'll naturally apply it. But real life doesn't work that way. Most people don't fail because the system is unclear. They fail because something deeper interferes, long before repetition has a chance to compound. Agreement is not commitment. The first truth is this: most people confuse agreement with commitment. When you read Atomic Habits, everything makes sense. You nod along. You recognize yourself in the examples. You feel clarity. That clarity creates relief. It feels like progress. But relief is not commitment. Commitment is uncomfortable. It requires showing up when the habit feels pointless, boring, or invisible. And that's where most people stop. They agree with the ideas intellectually, but never emotionally commit to the discomfort of repetition. They want habits to feel meaningful quickly. They want evidence that it's working. When that evidence doesn't appear, frustration sets in. And instead of questioning their expectations, they question the habit itself. The truth you ignore is this: understanding a habit does not make you loyal to it. Only commitment to boredom does. Relief feels like progress. You didn't fail at habits, you agreed with them. When you read Atomic Habits, everything made sense. You felt clarity. You felt motivated. You felt aligned. But agreement feels productive without demanding anything in return. Commitment is different. Commitment requires showing up when nothing feels rewarding, when the habit feels boring, when no one notices, when progress is invisible. That's where most people quietly stop, not because the habit is hard, but because agreement never prepared them for boredom. Clarity gives comfort. Commitment demands discomfort. And most people confuse one for the other. Understanding a habit doesn't make you loyal to it. Only commitment to repetition does, especially when it feels pointless. Identity resists change. The second truth is harder to face. You underestimate how much identity resistance sabotages behavior change. The book emphasizes identity-based habits. But reading about identity is not the same as confronting it. Every habit challenges an internal story. A story about who you are, what you're good at, and what you deserve. This creates hope at first. You imagine becoming someone new. Then tension appears, because that new identity conflicts with the old one you've lived with for years. The old identity feels familiar, safe, predictable. So when a habit threatens it, your mind creates friction. You forget, you delay, you rationalize. Not because the habit is hard, but because change threatens psychological stability. The ignored truth is this: your mind will protect identity before it protects improvement. And unless that resistance is acknowledged, habits never survive long enough to reshape behavior. Your mind protects the familiar. Your habits aren't failing. Your identity is fighting back. Every habit you try to build challenges an internal story. A story about who you are, what you're good at, what you usually do when things get uncomfortable. At first, change feels exciting. You imagine a better version of yourself. But very quickly, resistance appears. Not from the habit, but from the identity you've lived with for years. Your mind prefers familiar failure over unfamiliar growth. So it creates friction. You forget. You delay. You start tomorrow. Not because the habit is difficult, but because becoming someone new feels psychologically unsafe. Your brain will protect identity long before it protects improvement. Until you confront who you believe you are, no habit survives long enough to change your life. Systems don't replace responsibility. The third truth is the most uncomfortable. Most people use habit systems to avoid responsibility, not embrace it. Systems feel safe. They feel external. They feel objective. But over time, people hide behind them. When a habit fails, they blame the system. They tweak the routine. They search for a better framework. This is where cruelty enters. Because the real issue isn't the system, it's consistency. Habits fail not because the method is wrong, but because the person avoids ownership. Ownership means accepting that no system will carry you on days you don't want to show up. The ignored truth is this: systems support behavior, but they never replace personal responsibility. And when responsibility is avoided, habits collapse quietly and repeatedly. Consistency has a cost. Systems don't fail. People quietly step away from responsibility. Habit systems feel safe because they feel external. Schedules, routines, frameworks, they create the illusion that progress is automatic. But when the habit breaks, most people don't ask, "Did I avoid showing up?" They ask, "What system should I try next?" So they optimize instead of committing. They redesign instead of repeating. They search for a better method instead of facing consistency. The system becomes a shield, not a tool for change, but an excuse to avoid ownership. No system can carry you on the days you don't want to be accountable. Habits collapse not when systems fail, but when responsibility is negotiated. Change demands tolerance. Here is the reframe that changes everything. Atomic Habits doesn't fail people. People fail because they expect habits to change behavior before behavior changes identity. The real divide is not knowledge, it's tolerance. Tolerance for boredom, tolerance for slow progress, tolerance for discomfort without validation. Those who change are not more disciplined. They are more honest about what change actually costs. Once you see that, habits stop feeling mysterious. and start feeling demanding in a very specific way. Here's what Atomic Habits doesn't say. And here is exactly what I promised you at the beginning of this video. The real reason why so many people read Atomic Habits, understand it, and still end up exactly where they started. The truth is this: people don't fail because they don't know how habits work. They fail because they try to change behavior without accepting the psychological cost of change. Atomic Habits explains the system, but it doesn't emotionally prepare you for what that system demands. It demands boredom without immediate reward, repetition without visible progress, responsibility when no one is watching. Most people want habits that feel rewarding quickly. They want motivation, validation, proof that it's working. And when that doesn't appear, they assume the habit is broken. But the habit isn't broken. The expectation is. Real change begins when you stop asking, "Is this working yet?" and start asking, "Am I willing to sustain this even if it doesn't work right away?" That's the moment the book stops being theory and becomes a filter. Not between smart and ignorant people, but between those who can tolerate the process and those who only tolerate the idea of the result. Habits fail where identity negotiates. If you're still the same after reading Atomic Habits, it doesn't mean the book didn't work. It means you reached the psychological barrier the book doesn't confront directly. The barrier between knowing and becoming. Until you face that barrier, every habit will feel temporary. Every system will feel incomplete, and the cycle will repeat. Because habits don't change people. People change when they stop negotiating with who they've been. This content is for educational and informational purposes only. It does not constitute financial advice. Consult a professional before making financial decisions.